Now, can you hear me on the mics? Yeah, okay. Let's get started. It's a minute after 3:15. Let's get started. So welcome everyone to the session on partnering for forests. We have the multilateral climate funds here. They're going to speak about country collaboration and how to achieve greater synergy and impact associated with forests. So we're really excited that you're here. My name is Neha Sharma. I lead results-based management, knowledge, and learning at the Adaptation Fund. This is the second week for me on a new job, so you'll be kind and forgiving if I stumble a little bit. But I was with the Climate Investment Funds before I joined the Adaptation Fund. We all know that forests are really important for us as humanity, but that they are being lost at an alarming rate. So conservative estimates of forest loss say 10 million hectares a year, which is the size of Portugal a year. So this is considerable and significant. The loss of forests leads to loss of biodiversity, less carbon storage. It's leading to the release of large quantities of carbon, and it has grave impacts on climate change. So we're going to explore all those challenges and hear from the funds on what they're doing to address these challenges. We know that large-scale solutions will be needed. Concerted efforts will be needed. Collaboration will be needed. So we're going to ask the funds how they're doing that. Just to remind everybody, the four largest climate funds that we have here are the Climate Investment Funds, the Adaptation Fund, the Green Climate Fund, and the Global Environment Facility. Together, they manage about 50 million in grant and concessional resources, and they all aim to have adaptation and mitigation benefits in developing countries. So we have this 5-minute introduction, which is ending just now. We're going to hear from my colleague, Hannah Schweitzer, soon. Hannah leads the knowledge management efforts at the Climate Investment Funds, and what she's going to do is introduce the funds and introduce some of the challenges that they have learned through their operations and have come out through their knowledge and learning work. So we'll hear from her for 10 minutes, and then we'll have a panel conversation with representatives from the four funds. And then lastly, we'll hear from the countries on whether what the funds are saying resonates with them and whether they agree that the funds are collaborating in country. I've already introduced myself and Hannah. So with this, I'm going to pass this mic to my colleague Hannah for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have the panel conversation.
Thank you so much, Neha, and it's lovely to be with you all today. Thank you so much for joining the session. So as Neha said, I'm just going to try to go through this very quickly. It's a lot of information, so please bear with me. So first, we'll start with the Adaptation Fund, which since 2010 has been providing financing for projects and programs that help vulnerable communities in developing countries adapt to climate change. So although we may traditionally see forests as mitigation activities, forests play a critical role in climate change adaptation. So don't be fooled by the fact that forests only officially occupy 1% of the Adaptation Fund's portfolio, because forests are actually really a cross-cutting activity across many different sectors in the Adaptation Fund's portfolio, such as in water management, ecosystem-based adaptation, agriculture, coastal zone management. And if you really analyze the portfolio in detail, you'll see that forestry has been embedded in most of the Adaptation Fund's interventions, with more than 60 projects having a very significant forestry-related component. In terms of the evidence and lessons that have come out from the Adaptation Fund's portfolio, there's really strong evidence across the portfolio that adaptive capacity was enhanced through resilient agroforestry and ecosystem-based adaptation. There have been some ex-post evaluations conducted, which are about 3 to 5 years after a project concludes, to understand the sustainability of projects and their outcomes. And this is really crucial in the case of adaptation, since many impacts are generated over longer periods of time. And from 2 examples from Ecuador and Samoa, it was found that the integration of forestry-based solutions into broader adaptation strategies can significantly enhance ecosystem resilience and support sustainable livelihoods. And lastly, in terms of the opportunities for future adaptation projects, you can just see here a list of areas where more evidence in forestry and adaptation is needed. So you can see some examples on the slide here. Next, for the Climate Investment Funds, or the CIF, it's been around since 2008, and it provides large-scale, low-cost, long-term financing supporting both adaptation and mitigation activities. related to its forestry portfolio, the Forest Investment Program, or FIP, was established in 2009 to focus on sustainable forest management, or SFM, to transform forest policies and practices to reduce deforestation and degradation. So it's really in this REDD+ space. And one of the FIP's key features is the dedicated grant mechanism, or DGM, which is a separate funding mechanism which allows Indigenous people and local communities, or IPLCs, to directly access and self-determine the use of resources. And just generally for context, when the FIP was established in 2009, there were really few mechanisms that existed to channel forest financing directly to IPLCs. So the DGM was established in 2010 to really enhance the role of IPLCs in protecting the forests that they depend on. And more broadly, you can see here the value of the FIP investment and sort of in how many countries it operates in. In terms of the evidence and lessons, transformational change will require a longer line of sight between local inclusive approaches and changing the systemic structures that drive deforestation. So it's really about there's a need to engage in a coherent way with both large and small scale drivers to drive sector transformation. Basically, otherwise you will risk putting the burden of change on the smallest actors who are already the most vulnerable. So you really need to focus on both the large and small scale actors. In addition, sustainable impact can be diluted by spreading resources across multiple objectives and locations. And there's a need for a new approach for engaging the private sector to provide nimble and aligned financing. And finally, around the DGM, it was found that it's an innovative and successful IPLC-governed model to channel finance to forest-dependent IPLCs. And the success of this sort of IPLC-focused programming really depends on self-determined and representative governance coupled with robust funding. So this combination really cannot be underestimated. These structures took a lot of time and resources to put in place, so it's a missed opportunity if they discontinue after 5 years or so. Next, for the Green Climate Fund, or GCF, since 2005, it's the world's largest climate fund and operating entity of the financial mechanism of the UNFCCC, assisting with both adaptation and mitigation activities. In terms of its forestry portfolio, it has over $1.7 billion of investment, covering 65 projects and programs in over 50 countries. It's the most important sector for cross-cutting climate initiatives with both mitigation and adaptation benefits. So forests are really crucial for maintaining the GCF's 50-50 balance between mitigation and adaptation activities. The REDD+ results-based payments, or RBPs, pilot program was from 2017 to 2022 and delivered $500 million to 8 pilot countries and will now be mainstreamed into GCF's regular programming cycle. In terms of evidence and lessons from the GCF, REDD+ implementation projects are among GCF's most cost-effective mitigation initiatives. These projects have strong country ownership through building on several years of multi-stakeholder consultation and institutional capacity development. And this involving the Indigenous people and local communities and local actors. The ecosystem-based adaptation impacts of these projects really need to be recognized and reported consistently in addition to the mitigation benefits. And as mentioned, the REDD+ RBP investments will now be a core part of GCF's forestry portfolio moving forward. And what was found as well is that all countries have reinvested RBP proceeds into their updated national REDD+ strategies, reinforcing the virtuous cycle towards sustainable forest management. And lastly, there's been excellent coherence and complementarity of REDD+ RBM projects in the region, largely driven by countries. And there are also some strong coherence examples between MCF, or Multilateral Climate Fund, coherence and complementarity, such as Ecuador's Pro-Amazonia and Lao PDR's Environmental Protection Fund, which maybe my colleagues might elaborate on further then. Lastly, and apologies again, I'm running through a lot of information, so please bear with me. But lastly, for the Global Environment Facility, or GEF, since 1991, it's a family of funds that's dedicated to confronting biodiversity loss, climate change, pollution, and strains on the land and ocean's health. Around $4 billion have been allocated for sustainable forest management, covering around 700 projects and programs. Its overarching goal is to maintain, preserve, and restore the integrity and functioning of forest biomes, primarily in tropical areas. As a financial mechanism for the three Rio Conventions on Biodiversity, Climate Change, and Land Degradation and Desertification, forests have been central to Jeff's work. So primary forests are really at the core of Jeff's strategy, with sustainable forest management providing a powerful means by which to meet these conventions. And lastly, I'll just note that Jeff has supported SFM for almost 30 years, so it has the longest and broadest experience across all four of these funds. In terms of the evidence and lessons from the Jeff is well positioned as a natural and effective integrator of many goals concerning forests. The Jeff offers a way to integrate all of these international environmental and developmental goals related to forests. It's also important to note that it is important to manage the trade-offs and generally the way in which to support the long-term sustainability. That continues to be a challenge as we've seen across the portfolio. Successful integration of multiple environmental goals has led to impactful interventions, but a clear long-term vision is crucial for a comprehensive strategy and assessment. And just to maybe elaborate a bit more on that, in the Jeff's 30 years of support to SFM, there has been an evolution of approaches which has been adopted to the Jeff's programming directions, the context of global policies, and donor and country priorities. So even though these modalities have tended to become more complex and ambitious in scale and continue to evolve, there's not yet a very clear and long-term vision for sustainable forest management, which is something that has been noted from evidence. And lastly, just in terms of the monitoring, evaluation, and learning, evidence shows that M&E systems often lack standardized outcome and impact indicators. So there's really a need for more standardized indicators, consistent reporting, and a focus on socioeconomic benefits. Again, sorry, I know that was a lot of information, and that's only really a drop of it's really a tiny snapshot of the wealth of knowledge and evidence that has been accumulated over the many years of implementation experience across these four funds. But just really to maybe summarize a little bit and help put all of this information a little bit more into context, you'll see here some common themes. First, it's the interlinkage between nature, biodiversity, and climate change, and really the fact that there's a need for integrated approaches to address all of these. The need for integration of adaptation and mitigation measures, the importance and complementarity, importance of complementarity and coherence of the multilateral climate funds. So really to build on the MCF's comparative advantages. And then there's a need to ensure long-term vision and to really address the challenges with ensuring sustainability once projects are concluded. And lastly, across all the funds, you could really see that success was really built into and really thanks to really strong stakeholder engagement, especially with Indigenous people and local communities. So again, I'll stop there. Thank you for bearing with me as I rushed through all of that. And I will now pass back over to Neha. Go ahead.
Ooh. The electric touch. Thank you so much, Hannah. So what we were trying to do there is make the life of the speakers both easier and harder. Easier because they no longer have to introduce their funds, and harder because we can really get into some depth here. So you don't have to spend time in telling us where you're from, but I will introduce you very quickly. So we'll go from right to left here. So we have David Macaulay, who's the co-chair of the independent expert panel for the Nature People Climate program in the Climate Investment Funds. We have my colleague Saliha, who leads programming and innovation at the Adaptation Fund. We have Pascal Martinez from the Global Environment Facility, who's the lead for forests and wildlife. He's the thematic lead for those two areas. And then we have Ben Wickers, who is a senior specialist for land use, forests, and ecosystems at GCF. We're going to hear from two speakers after we hear from this panel. Vinicius Azeredo, who's the Sustainable Finance Project Manager for the Ministry of Finance in Brazil, and Noor Masribatin, who's a special advisor from the Ministry of Environment and Forests in Indonesia. So we'll do a bit of a switcheroo in 30 minutes from now. So I'm going to come and sit with the panelists and wear these. Great. So I'm going to start with a question to my Jeff and CIF colleagues, so Pascal and David, and I'm going to reflect a little bit more on ask you to reflect a little bit more on what Hannah shared. So one of the lessons that's coming quite clearly from the funds is this, our questions about the climate and nature nexus. So I wanted to ask you, maybe starting with Pascal, can you share a little bit about how the Jeff is addressing this climate nature or climate biodiversity nexus? How are you approaching this? What impact are you seeing? And just share a little bit more about from the Jeff perspective.
Thank you very much for the question. Hi, everybody. First, I would say that the Jeff is naturally addressing both challenges of biodiversity and climate because as a financial mechanism of the Rio Conventions, it's at the core mandate of the Jeff to deliver on this aspect. So this is natural that the Jeff is doing that, and then also we have been over the years promoting each time more integrated approaches. No, we began long time ago working in silos, like to deliver on biodiversity convention, to deliver on climate, to deliver on desertification or degradation, and little by little we have always integrated more these different conventions. So we developed projects or approaches that were addressing both climate and biodiversity. And in forest, it is even more true because the forest is integrated by nature. Forest, you cannot have good project in forest only for climate and not biodiversity, and vice versa. So it was not natural evolution that the work of the Jeff was even more focusing on addressing these two issues. And as a result, naturally the forest portfolio of the Jeff has been increasing over the Jeff cycles. As what it was said in the introduction, it's quite massive. Over the 30 years, $4 billion, $23 billion of co-financing. So it was really one of the most important area, if not the most important area of the Jeff since the beginning. And we end up the last cycle, Jeff 7 cycle, pardon, sorry, with $234 million of projects per year. And as we have been increasing over the cycles, it should be normally even more in Jeff 8 and moving forward. And we have now in the current Jeff cycle, we have two main mechanisms to deliver on this nexus of biodiversity and climate. The first one is the new Jeff strategy. It was mentioning in the lessons that somehow it has been our independent evaluation office 2 years ago said, oh yes, but the Jeff strategy on forest is not so clear or so easy to understand where Jeff wants to go. It was quite logical because there are so many different objectives that we can have when we have forest projects. So maybe it was not so clear or clearly written, I would say. But we respond to that with our new strategy. It was published in May this year. And this strategy is focusing on the preserving the integrity and functioning of the ecosystems, forest ecosystems, with a clear focus and priority on primary forest, because as we all know, primary forests are the most important place where we can have the rich biodiversity and important carbon stock and carbon sink. So it was logical that we moved in this strategy towards the primary forest. And the second entry point to deliver is the current program that we have also on primary forest. It is the biggest of Jeff 8 program. We have 11 different programs. This is the biggest one, $307 million. With the co-financing is around a $2 billion program that will begin next year. We are finalizing all the child projects. 28 countries are participating. These 28 countries represent more or less a bit more than 80% of the remaining primary forests in the world. So it's a global and very ambitious program that we're beginning. And again, it will very much focus and deliver on the nexus of climate and biodiversity. And finally, we have also cross-cutting issues that are not specific to forest, but are also serving the purpose of delivering on this nexus. For instance, and one important that we are now pushing is a policy coherence, because we cannot achieve any result if we don't have policy coherence. We speak always about the financing gap, but there is two ways to fill this gap. One way is to put more money in the system, that we all know that we need more money. But another one is to have less needs. To need less money, and this can be addressed with more policy coherence. So we have this kind of cross-cutting issues that also serve the purpose of addressing this nexus of biodiversity and climate. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Pascal. And I saw a lot of nodding heads when you spoke about policy coherence, and maybe that's something we can pick up later. And as you said, it's quite natural given your mandate. This nexus comes naturally to the GEF. What about the CIFs? So could you speak a little bit, David, about this nexus, and is it natural for the climate investment funds to be working on biodiversity? And if so, how are they doing so?
Sure. Thanks very much, and happy to be here with you today. My colleague, Paul Hartman, who's coordinator on this, couldn't come to the COP, so I send his regards, and happy to be here on his behalf. I think the story there with regard to the climate investment funds and forests, as Hannah has already laid out for you, was that back in the mid 2008 to 2010 or so, it was early days with respect to this integration that you're talking about. But the forest investment program did explicitly include as co-benefits an aspiration to work on both for the climate benefits and the biodiversity benefits. And it worked across 13 countries and had more than 500 million in investment from CIF with a high co-financing ratio as well. But it wasn't yet sort of a results framework and a structure that fully integrated attention to that. I think there were a lot of good lessons that came from it. And one of them was that was quite innovative, was this creation of the dedicated grant mechanism for Indigenous peoples and local communities, where you had sort of top-down planning and cooperation with the governments, but an insistence that you also not only respect the rights and legitimate aspirations of local communities and Indigenous peoples, but engage them to some extent in the planning and the design as well as implementation. Then just this last year, CIF came forward with another program, which isn't explicitly for forest ecosystem conservation and management but it is focused on ecosystems, the nature, people, and climate program. And we're finding in that process, as Hannah, or I guess you mentioned, Neham, I served as the co-chair of this independent expert panel that reviewed 46 country proposals and 2 regional proposals. And that's part of the business model for climate investment funds. It's not on a 4-year funding cycle like GF or the Green Climate Fund, but rather programs are put together through dialogue between the developing countries and developed countries on what is needed. And then CIF comes together to try to create something that will be responsive to meeting those needs. And this Nature, People, and Climate program is the first one within the climate investment funds that really simultaneously addresses this integration. You can tell by the title. And it has also in its results framework an explicit orientation to generating not just climate benefits, but also measuring those for addressing biodiversity loss, as well as the people who are dependent on these natural systems for their livelihoods and cultural and spiritual backgrounds and everything else. So that's the background on that. The Forest Investment Program was 13 countries. It's wrapped up now. There's been an evaluation that was alluded to by Hannah. And I think some good lessons have come from that have been applied in the Nature, People, and Climate program. And then we're just getting started, the climate investment funds on the Nature, People, Climate. And looking forward, I can maybe say a word in I know we may have some Q&A on this, so I'm going to try to inoculate a little bit going forward, because we are here in the Climate Funds Pavilion. I would say there's also been some lessons learned about how the climate funds can work together under the leadership of the countries. And I don't want to get ahead of anything my colleagues might say in the next panel, but definitely some lessons learned on that. Whereas before it was a matter of sort of dividing up the work among the funds, in Brazil, okay, Jeff, you take the Amazon, we'll work with you, and climate investment funds, you go to Cerrado and work there. And, and you'll learn from each other in cooperation with the country. But now it's talking about more integrated approach and either sequential financing where Jeff develops the proof of concept and GCF or CIF comes in, or adaptation fund, and then the other funds with maybe more resources come in behind and go in more depth to realize that. So clearly you have to address the climate and the nature crises as two sides of the same coin. And within climate, you have to look at forests as part of the solution on both adaptation and mitigation.
No, thank you so much, David. And it's great to hear about how the lessons from the FIP program are now being used for the NPC. And you've alluded to some collaboration that's already, or the structural collaboration that's needed across the multilateral climate funds. So I'm going to go to Saliha now and ask about adaptation. So David spoke about ecosystem resilience. He spoke about the DGM, which I know is focused a lot on livelihood benefits at the most local level. So Saliha, could you share a little bit about how the adaptation fund might be approaching livelihood benefits and ecosystem resilience?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Saliha Barzik. I lead programming and innovation at the Adaptation Fund, which is the fund that has been established under the Kyoto Protocol to support adaptation in all developing countries that are party to Kyoto Protocol or Paris Agreement since then. And with that, we were given a mission to support concrete adaptation interventions on the ground that are country-driven. That essentially meant that we have never been prescriptive in terms of telling the countries, this is how much funding is going to be dedicated to this sector or that sector, or you should be working on forestry, and here's the forestry strategy. We've never had anything like that. We're really adaptation focused. So interestingly enough, or maybe not surprising at all when you think about it, a lot of our portfolio nonetheless has forestry elements. I heard 61 countries from our portfolio. I forgot that statistic. That's about a third of the countries that we have currently in our portfolio, a growing portfolio. And the size of the portfolio of the Adaptation Fund is 1.2 billion, and we have projects in over 110 countries globally in all regions of the South. Another statistic that I've heard, and our projects are a different size, so they're not necessarily conflicting statistics, but around, I think, 25% of the funding is actually for forestry projects. So that just goes to say that for resilience, so for to help people adapt, forests are and forestry are really, really important. And we have had some experience with that now, and the evaluations and studies have come out that indeed confirm that. For instance, what they find is that forestry and water management enhances water retention, reduces erosion, and supports flood prevention. They find that forestry and agriculture contributes to soil stabilization, water management, and the enhancement of farming resilience. Our projects are small scale, so there are some difficulties in the fact that the impact is limited by the scale of our projects in some cases. In coastal management, forests are incredibly important for both attenuation of the hazards like coastal flooding, but also for maintaining the economic benefits of, for example, aquaculture or farming in mangrove areas. We also have examples that show that, yeah, we have lots of examples, and in the interest of time, maybe I'll get to them in the next round. But just to conclude this intervention, overall, integration of forestry-based solutions into broader adaptation strategies can significantly enhance ecosystem resilience and support sustainable livelihoods is another finding from the evaluation of the projects that from our portfolio that have forest components. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Saliha. And I'm going to ask the same question to you, Ben. Could you speak a little bit about GCF's efforts on forestry, but specifically on ecosystem resilience and livelihood benefits? And we may come back to Saliha for the example you wanted to share, but if you can, Ben, share some examples, that would be great.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Leah. Right, yeah. So I thanks everybody for the interventions. I suppose I'm following a tough crowd here. The GCF is first of all a mechanism of the Paris Agreement. So we are the climate fund that was set up to essentially meet the third pillar of the Paris Agreement after mitigation, adaptation. This is finance. So we have been set up to essentially implement that pillar to the extent possible, and this has been very specifically articulated with respect to the forestry sector. In terms of I think everyone's familiar with the negotiations that went on prior to the Paris Agreement for REDD+, which ended in the Warsaw Framework on REDD+ in 2011. Within that framework, GCF, which didn't yet exist in practice, was referred to as the source of finance that was explicitly mentioned within the framework to provide finance both for implementing policies and measures to reduce emissions from deforestation, forest degradation, as well as to provide results-based finance. And that was reiterated again in Article 5 of the Paris Agreement itself. So that's something when we think about how we deal with forests in the Green Climate Fund, we should really come back to those references. And this is where our mandate in forests is coming from. And REDD+ was always considered, as we mentioned before, a mitigation mechanism. But if these mechanisms are well designed, they should have adaptation benefits. If they don't, then there's generally something not quite right with the way they're designed. We also should, by dint of the way that REDD+ was designed, that is to focus on areas where there are threats to forest, where there is a threat to deforestation, or where there are barriers to restoration or reforestation initiatives. We are focusing mainly on the marginal areas. So rather than, as Pascal mentioned, Jeff is focusing on primary forests. GCF is focusing on those areas where there is the interaction between forest dependent communities and the forests themselves. So very much more at the margins, where there are degraded forest environments, where there is potential for restoration, and where those threats and those potentials are areas where we can work on with specific interventions. So where you're dealing at that border between the forest ecosystems and the communities, adaptation is an absolutely core part of the way you design these initiatives. And I think that is evident in the way that we have financed forestry throughout the last 10 years of our portfolio. Most of our interventions in the forest sector, which now, I mean, there are 65 or so projects which explicitly incorporate mitigation objectives. There are another 30 or so that deal with the forest sector that do not reference mitigation, but do reference adaptation objectives. In all cases, though, they are cross-cutting in practice. I think this is something which needs to be more clearly emphasized, and we need to move away from this vision of REDD+ in particular as a mitigation initiative and as something that can actually contribute meaningfully to the adaptation goals in developing countries' NDCs. So that is something with the decision that was recently made in the GCF board at B40, where we're going to now mainstream results-based payments for REDD+ into our programming portfolio. We're going to try and make sure that's something we can move forward with in a meaningful way. But it is also, I think, critical to make this distinction between what we're already doing in terms of the implementation of national REDD+ strategies and these results-based payments, which are another stage of the process. Most of our investments in the forest sector are building on substantial initiatives made in terms of institutional and technical capacity building in the countries concerned over a number of years prior to the GCF coming in, and are therefore imbued with strong country ownership, perhaps more so than in other sectors. So there's strong strategic direction, there's strong consultation, there's strong ownership among multiple stakeholders, and there's very strong safeguards against the risks of socioeconomic or environmental maladaptation. And we are now at a point where we can start learning from what we've done. I mean, we are not as old as the other funds, 10 years in total. Most of our forestry interventions are still ongoing or maybe not even yet started. So we have a small number which are closed and which we can now learn from. And I'll just mention the couple that were highlighted in the slides there. In Madagascar, we are about to finish a 6-year project with the Conservation International support, where they have aligned their monitoring process with the national government's REDD+ reference level and MRV process. We have verified 9 million tons of emission reductions by the end of this year. We anticipate 9 million. We have verified 8.2. This is also important in leveraging finance from the World Bank's Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, something which I think has also been an element of some of the CIF investments over the years. We've also seen some important advances in working on zero deforestation commodities. And this is something which has been evident in our project in Ecuador with UNDP that finished last year, and that was implemented in parallel with a CIF project under the same program. That has demonstrated the importance in coffee and cocoa value chains of working with forest dependent communities to develop approaches that are designed by them, owned by them, but actually explicitly motivated by access to new markets in the EU which demand these new ESG protocols. And finally, there is I think a good example of how we're now moving into working with the private sector more constructively in the forestry and land use area with the Green Fund, where GCF is now a major shareholder, and $125 million was invested in this major forest and land use initiative, which is focused on developing sustainable production systems in these zero deforestation commodities. All of these were done with a element of adaptation impacts inherent in the design of these projects and programs. Stop.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Ben. And I think all the speakers spoke about the importance of integrated approaches and the new cool things that they're doing, and also integrating lessons from past experience. I'm going to move to asking them about collaborative approaches. So we know the multilateral climate funds have been aiming to work more and more cohesively, more and more in collaboration and alignment with each other. There've been a lot of joint statements. We're going to hear from the countries later on whether they're seeing this on the ground. But from your point of view, how are you seeing this evolve? How are you seeing this change? David, you already shared some examples there, but do you have others on what does this collaboration look like? And are there successful examples of this collaboration? So we can change the order, or maybe to keep it easier with the mic, we'll just stick to that same order and maybe have David, you go first, right to left. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. I'll just follow on from what I said before. Whereas in the earlier stages, it was more a matter of working with a planning ministry or a finance ministry or an environment ministry, and it tended to divide up by geography often. But cross-learning, of course, through the government especially. But as this evolves, I see a number of models emerging for stronger collaboration. Some of it can be sequencing, as I was suggesting, and you do find, as Ben just mentioned, you're building on perhaps a model that was initially funded in cooperation with GEF or the Adaptation Fund, and then the government brings forward a scaled out version of that after the proof of concept is done. So that's one thing, sort of sequencing. The other is to take more of a programmatic approach within, say, a landscape, or even for smaller countries at the national country level, to work together either by topic or really in hand. So I can think some examples of how that happens also. And the one I will give is with the Rwanda Green Fund in working on the Nature, People, and Climate program of the Climate Investment Funds, where they really convened at the country level, created a platform for dialogue amongst the multilateral climate funds and also some bilateral funding partners. I mean, this is not anything new. Governments have been doing this for years, but really much more focused on climate finance and channeling that consistent with the NPC and the country's priorities. And I would say the Rwanda example is really quite impressive thus far. We'll see, it's still early days. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Saliha, do you?
Sure. Thank you. So since the Adaptation Fund offers, as you may know, grant financing, it's purely grant. The amounts of funding available per project are up to $10 million for single country projects, up to $14 million for regional projects. So this is the scale. And there's no co-financing required. So as David mentioned, this is the sort of a thing that's quite convenient for countries to access in order to have a small demonstration, relatively small demonstration project. So something that can actually show results, positive impacts on the ground at that scale is potentially something that could be scaled up further by other funds. And by the way, not everything needs to be scaled or should be scaled, and not everything is going to work at different scales. So yeah, and that's one of the reasons why we shy away from some types of investments that are not going to show results. It makes no sense to use this limited grant funding for those kinds of things. Specifically on forestry, we have seen some very promising interventions. For example, in Cambodia, I saw a project where local communities are essentially managing the forests sustainably, taking into account, observing this ecosystem and taking into account projections, how the climate is going to change over time. They're harvesting sustainably high value trees, but they have also established greenhouses where they're able to grow from seeds and saplings the species that need to then be used to replenish the forest. And this is generating income for the community. Just one of the many examples that I can think of where certainly this is something that can be scaled up, that can be taken up by other funders and considered for other places, both within Cambodia and beyond. So this is a sort of the model that the Adaptation Fund works with.
Yeah, Pascal, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Maybe I would like to begin with a note, not so positive, if I may. Now, just to be realistic, it's not an easy task, no, because we are different organizations, we have different modalities, we have different timelines, so we are not necessarily aligned when the projects come to the countries. But then we try to accommodate, we try to make this working together, but it's not something obvious, easy, and that's why we are having this discussion. That's why we are developing common strategy. With the GCF, we have what we call the long-term vision. On purpose, we are trying to work in some specific countries to see how we can improve the coordination. It's not something natural. And Rwanda is a very good example of successful work that we have been doing to work with the countries, but arriving in the country together and participating in platforms, dedicated platforms from the country to improve in this coordination. So it's not something, about just says that it's not something so natural and so easy. But still, having said that, we see in the GEF portfolio, there are many projects where we see World Bank with the GEF or the GCF, the GEF Adaptation Fund. I don't know if it is so often or so natural, but I see this common participation in the same project, and it appears like a co-financing in general, no? And then you have different kind of coordination. One is, I would say, opportunistic, because two projects arrive together. So the countries look for co-financing because we are all asking co-financing. So all the projects, all the funds comes together in the project proposal. But sometimes also, and this is, I think maybe if we can remind something that I'm saying, is the catalytic effect of the GEF. The GEF is not so much money as compared to other funds, but the GEF can trigger the delivery of the landing of other funds, no? And we have this model of GEF providing grants, quite limited, 5 million, 10 million, but then trigger 10 times more resources as loans or other kind of resources, also other grants. But the fact that the GEF enter in the system can trigger other stakeholders to scale up what's being done. And this is, I think, the most common successful model that we can see in the GEF portfolio is when the GEF really make this happen at a bigger scale, no? So this different kind of coordination, some not so planned ahead, others plan ahead when GEF triggers some funding. And then, yes, we need really to strengthen our coordination because it's not something happening naturally. And lastly, I would like to say, because I don't know if I will have wanted to speak more, the GEF is country driven. So we depend on the decision of the country to do what they want to do with the GEF money. And I think that there is a key role played by the countries in our coordination because we are speaking together, how we work better together. Yeah, but it doesn't depend on us. It depends on the country first. So it's very important that the country creates this kind of space where the discussion can happen with all the climate funds.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no, thank you. And thank you for raising the contradictions inherent in trying to work together, but it being hard, it not being natural. And like Selena and you were both saying, not everything needs to be scaled. So not everything is about piloting and scaling by another fund, but there's some instances where that shouldn't happen. And you've emphasized, I think all of you, this country ownership piece. So we're going to hear from the countries just in a few minutes on whether they feel like they're owning this process or not. But first, Ben, please, anything you want to react
firstly,
to?
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, so just I think three issues. Firstly, GCF has a readiness fund, which we are trying to help countries to develop their programs of financial support to meet their NDCs. This is not only intended to help identify financing opportunities for the GCF, but can also be used to identify financing opportunities for the other climate funds as well. So that's something we're trying to make more explicit when we are working with countries through that readiness fund. It doesn't need to end up with a GCF concept note. It can end up with a concept that then goes through one of the other funds as well. Then secondly, of course, we have our regular programming window where we are currently, we have a policy, and as Pastor said with Jeff, it's really rather explicit that we look for complementarity and coherence with the other climate funds proactively. So if there is opportunity for such coherence, we ask our accredited entities to look for it, to explicitly refer to it, and seek out opportunities to enhance it. So that's something that we look for within our programming process proactively. And yes, there is sometimes the serendipity of when it happens without us planning for it. But I think there are two examples I would like to point out of where it was actively, one where it was actively planned, and that's the Ecuador project I mentioned earlier, the Pro Amazonia program, which was built on several years of readiness efforts. But then when the government developed their program of REPLA's implementation, they called it the Pro Amazonia program. They sought financing partners to implement that program. They developed one GCF project and they developed one GEF project at the same time to implement different parts of that program in parallel. So that was very consciously done. In Lao PDR, the GEF was one of the partners in the establishment of the Lao Environmental Protection Fund, which then became the main vehicle for developing Lao PDR's national REP Plus strategy, which was also developed with the World Bank's Forest Carbon Partnership Facilities assistance. The GCF projects in Laos with GIZ are implementing that REP Plus strategy of the World Bank's FCPF, building on the work that Jeff did earlier. So that wasn't a conscious aim of the Jeff investment, but it's what Pascal was referring to as an example of where it's sequential. I think which also was mentioned earlier as well. So those are examples of how this coherence and complementarity has emerged, but also how GCF is actively trying to promote it through our programming systems.
Yeah, both, one planned and one not, but both very compelling examples. So thank you so much for sharing those. We might take one or two questions before we hear from the countries. If there's any burning question for the panelists now, we could take maybe one or two. Anything you want to ask them? If not, then you can think about what you want to ask them because you'll have another chance. Okay, one question there. We'll just take that one. And I'm going to give you my mic.
Thank you very much. I can see that coordination and my name is Abdul Ghani. I'm from the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, Somalia. I'm the senior advisor. In Somalia, we have had on GEF and GCF, but it's still adaptation and CIF did not being had. I think it's a process, but what I agree is collaboration and coordination at the state level is at the ministry level, at the country level is very important. We'll take that as a positive and then pass the message to our senior management team. But my question is regarding on even if the model of each one is different, as a high level board member, is there any coordination or any intentional planning before the country you go? I know the boards have meeting different, but if there is is there any annual planning meeting that all the funding, they can see if they are any suggestion or alignment with their funding to the country, specifically the country that I'm representing from Somalia. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a very important question, David. You wanted to answer it, but I hope you're not suggesting a fifth governance system over the existing 4 governance systems for decision making. I don't think that's what you were suggesting, but David, did you want to take this? We might have maybe just 2 of you answer. Yeah, let me pass you this one. Just in the interest of time. So David's got that first slot.
As you said, we don't want to complicate things too much, but yes, there is a draft action plan that's been created by the 4 funds and has gone before their respective governing bodies that includes attention to working with their government counterparts to create these sort of country platforms that we've all referred to. And that's the main mechanism, is because it should be driven by the country. But each, the access to the funding is quite different for each of the 4. So it makes it a little bit harder. In the case of the climate investment funds, it's program based, and these come up on an irregular basis. Maybe every year or 2, there's a new program of funding under the climate investment funds. And then there's a request for proposals for expressions of interest from the countries. So as I think Pascal was saying, you need to get the timing right in order to be able to follow the strategy on coherence and complementarity that is developing. I'd say it's early days. It's still a draft action plan. It was only, I had the privilege to moderate the meeting, the sort of opening presentation last Wednesday of the 4 heads of the 4 funds. And this was the emphasis they were giving, that it's early days. They hope to progress this in cooperation with their partner countries. And there is a commitment to the country drivenness, but at the same time, coordination amongst the funds. And that's kind of what they're trying to square there.
Yeah, thanks, David. Maybe just one more. Okay, so Sadia, did you want to? Go ahead.
I can just say that, sorry, I'm losing my voice. Just to say that actually we don't want to get together and discuss what's best for Somalia. We expect Somalia to get together internally and discuss what's best and then to come to us. And then we're happy to support that. We don't like the principle of it. We don't like the optics of us, the seeming like we're making top-down decisions. That is not our mission. That's not in our mandate. So no, we don't do that, but we do coordinate, and we are trying to coordinate more just to be more effective as we serve the countries that we serve.
Thanks, Sadia. I feel bad that I haven't given both of you an opportunity, but do you need 30 seconds? No, you're good. Okay, then let's do the
Just very briefly, she mentioned the effectiveness. That is from the top down, that is something we can do that is in response to the demand for simplified access, improved access to funding. And we are all working on that very.
Thanks so much, David. Yeah, very important point. Thanks so much. So we're going to invite the countries Anur and Vinicius, if you don't mind, and I'll ask our multilateral climate fund representatives to take a seat. You will still have a chance to ask them questions. So if you had something you wanted them to respond to, you can pose that in a few minutes. So we're really lucky to have with us country representatives who've been listening very intently to what these funds are saying. Before I even ask you a question, was there something they said that you were like, yes, this is exactly what I wanted to say? Or was there something they said that you were like, I need to respond to that immediately. I'm going to have to get coffee with this person and clear the air. Anything that really pulled your heartstrings? Vinicius, we'll start with you. Do you hear anything right now that was just, you must respond to?
A lot of that was said by the panelists of the funds. It's in my speech already. Yeah. So I think the coherence and all the things are aligned, and the work has been done to evolving, and I think it's the the road is paved to us to improve all the funds, the effectiveness of the funds. So
Great. So a lot of it resonated with you in
yes.
terms of actions and intention. Noor, anything you want to just say at the very beginning? I'm going to give you my mic. Here you go.
Yeah, thank you, Neha. Thank you, colleague from Multilateral Climate Fund who just presented today. I think from all of the statement made, yeah, I agree on many things actually, because Indonesia has experience. We got this all of the fund under this the Lake Adaptation Fund, and also a fifth in the past DGM, DCF, GF. So we have that experience. One thing that when we talk about the collaboration and how the country like Indonesia could get the more benefit from the fund that we get. First, as already mentioned, that each of the fund has its own modalities. You have a different timeline and also a different focus. So the way I see is there are something that need to be done at the national level, but there are something that we expect that all of this one also work together, how you could help us to with the fund that you provide to us, we could achieve more. This is that what we are thinking even at the national level.
Thanks so much. And you're alluding to the impact of the funds, and I think maximizing that in addition to that collaboration or coherence piece. So I wanted to hear, we're going to ask you again about the multilateral climate funds, but before that, could you share a little bit the country perspective on some of the things we discussed, like the nexus, the climate nature nexus, the climate biodiversity nexus, the resilient ecosystem livelihoods, but what is the country perspective on these things? How are you approaching this in Brazil? So let's hear from
Thank you, Neha. It's a pleasure to be here to share some experience on how climate finance can drive real impact at local levels. So the global climate crisis demands systemic change, but we know that the solutions often lie in the empowerment of communities closest to the challenges and opportunities on the ground. So Brazil has long recognized the forest as the vital role of forest in mitigating climate change, protecting biodiversity, and supporting sustainable development. So over the years, our country leveraged with the multilateral climate funds in advanced in forest initiatives, in crucial forest initiatives. So this partnership have not only helped us mitigate climate change, but also strengthen the resilience, improved livelihoods, and advanced sustainable forest governance. And for some experience, real experience, so I try to talk about the sustainable finance, sustainable forest management of the JEF, the program. This program demonstrates that its crucial role in catalyzing the contributions of the local communities and indigenous peoples in Brazil. So the program recognized that these communities, they are the stewards of some of the world's most biodiverse and crucial ecosystem, especially the Amazon. So with through target investments, it strengthened their capacities to sustainably manage the forestry and protect biodiversity and mitigate climate change. The other program that is as a crucial role in Brazil is the forest investment program under the CIFs. So that has also been a key enabler of our efforts to protect the forest and mitigate climate change, and also adaptations now measures. And in Brazil, the FIP has supported the initiative, targets deforestation drivers, and promotes sustainable forest management, and encouraging low carbon economic activities. And an essential dimension of the FIPs, the Brazil's FIP experience is the inclusion of the dedicated grant mechanism. The DGM provides direct funds to the indigenous peoples and local communities. In Brazil, this mechanism supported 57 sub-projects, so contributed to improve the environmental and livelihood conditions of 35,000 beneficiaries with a strong focus on women and youth. And the inclusiveness empowered local actors and contribute to the forest protection, restoration, and biodiversity conservation, and the mitigation in climate change mitigation. And so, but the implementation of some of those forest programs face some challenge, such as bureaucratic hurdles and delays in funds disbursements, which affects the timely execution of projects and the continuity of community-led initiatives reliant on consistent funding. Additionally, aligning the FIPs and the DGNs and all the goals of these programs with broader national priorities, such as agricultural expansion, policy coherence, as Paul said, policy coherence challenge. So this misalignment at times hindered the indigenous and local communities from fully benefit from the goals, the benefits of these programs, and underscoring the need of improved coordination and balanced diverse policy objectives. From the key lessons for the Brazil forest portfolio, I will underscore some 4 key lessons. The inclusive governance and capacity building, so the successful of the sustainable forest management programs was largely due to the integration of these communities, the indigenous people, into the project since the design of the project. The other key lesson was the multi-sector collaboration. So the Brazil government collaborated with multiple ministries and local government and NGOs to create a coordinated multi-level governance system, adaptive strategies in the field. So a key takeaway from Brazil experience is the need to build adaptive strategy to allow sustainable forest management programs to evolve in response to the environmental and socioeconomic change and socioeconomic benefits. So the recognition of the need that the scalable of the sustainable forest management programs have to combine environmental benefits with socioeconomic gains. So the like, for example, the FIP Macaúba and the FIP Natural Landscapes protect, for example, provide important models for engaged smallholders in sustainable agroforestry systems, link restoration and income generation. And I would like to take this opportunity to emphasize our important work carried out by the Sustainable Finance Working Group under our G20 presidents, and we are optimistic about the next steps and look forward to the funds advancing the implementation of the recommendations of the approved HLAG report on optimizing the funds access and the work as a system with the MDBs and national developments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you shared a lot of lessons and a lot of good initiatives in the country, but the theme of inclusivity and the bottom up and the local efforts that you emphasized is really well appreciated. So thank you for bringing that in. Noor, over to you. Could you share a little bit about what's happening in Indonesia and how the country is approaching resilient ecosystems, livelihood benefits, and all of the different integrated forestry approaches that are needed?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Let me begin with talking about the forest. The beauty of the forest is When we protect forest, we protect biodiversity. We cannot protect biodiversity without protecting forest. When we protect forest, we also protect the livelihood of so many people dependent on us. Even that's protecting our nation also, especially for Indonesia, because 70% of our territory that's forest area. It's not I'm not talking about forest cover. This is for forest area that's by law is designed as a forest area. When we talk how we approach that, um, like when we interpret our global commitment, for example, we have NDC with significant content on adaptation. Forest play a significant role in our NDC, both for mitigation and adaptation. And in our adaptation in NDC, that's also address the linkage between the Rio Convention. So that's what we have in NDC. We have also a national biodiversity strategy and action plan, where over there we are talking also about the climate, about livelihood, ecosystem resilience, social resilience, and others. We have also RED Plus strategy, where we also address the benefit of RED Plus in terms of biodiversity and adaptation, go benefit from RED Plus. In those approach of our policy, when we address one thing, we also link to another. But when we put in the implementation, the challenge is when measuring. It's measuring carbon is very easy. The methodology is there. But when we measure how much the benefit in terms of adaptation, in terms of livelihood and others, so this is the challenge. And when we talk about the funding, the external funding, the biggest challenge is the timeline, different timeline. For example, Indonesia has 10 years program, a 5-year program under these 3 documents. But the funding from different funding, we receive all of this funding, but they come at different timeline and also with different criteria of eligibility of the activities that can be covered. And honestly, biodiversity, in fact, is not be valued adequately. So that's also the challenge. I think that's the my critic to all colleague. Although yes, you mentioned about the importance of biodiversity, but we have experience also when we got the funding about the for RED Plus. We said, we are the country of the mega biodiversity. We want our biodiversity be valued on that. Also, we address livelihood. We want to have that to be considered. No, this is one criteria why Indonesia is selected. So that's also, the experience that we have so far. So I think to me, the way I see, we have homework, yes, at the national level. How we really make all of this that become integrated in the reality. That's still the challenge. But also how the external support also come at the right time, at the right area that we need to be supported like that.
No, thank you, Noor, and thank you for telling the funds that they need to come in at the right time, and they need to talk to you about what the right timing might be. So I am actually going to ask Vinicius, you as well. Anything you want to say to the funds? They're sitting right in front of you, and they've assured us that they'll take these messages to the higher ups. What would you like to tell them in terms of collaborating in country and supporting the efforts of your government?
I think that the all the work that we done in the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group shows that there is a lot of space of improvements in a lot of areas, like how can I say, on project evaluation, the project disbursement, and energy registration, and so it's a lot of things that's we can work together with the funds, and the whole system of the climate international infrastructure, finance architecture, sorry, and to work as a system with MDBs and national developed banks, in, for example, the countering platforms that's at space, that's bring together all the stakeholders that can contribute to construct a countering program and bring all the financial source to finance this program and these projects.
Thank you. Well, sorry, were you finishing your point? Go ahead. Or you were done. So Noor, I know you didn't hold back before, but was there anything else you wanted to tell the funds?
Yeah, I think I already mentioned earlier. David mentioned about the sequencing. Yes, there is possible, but again, you have a different timeline also. The process and the procedure, and sometimes we the time from we submit the proposal till we get the funding is sometimes it's 3 years. And also we have also in national processes. So what we really hope is how from learning from each country experience, and in yourself, what you could improve on your side, and then for us, of course, we continuously trying to improve.
Oh, thank you so much, Noor. And Vinicius, one point you brought up that I'm going to put in a plug for, given that I lead results-based management and was leading evaluation, is evaluation. So there's been a lot of work across the funds on results and indicators and the monitoring, evaluation, learning processes that are associated with each of these. And there's some progress there in terms of synchronizing the results frameworks and the indicators. But I'm going to open up for more questions. You can ask a question to anybody who has spoken, including Hannah. So any questions? Did you have, or any thoughts or anything you want to share? Work that's happening in your country, in your institutions, on forestry that resonates? Yeah. Oh, great. 2 hands up.
My name is Lidiane Castro, and I work for Conservation International. And Conservation International, it's the global executing agency of DGM. So this whole conversation has been very enlightening, and I'm sitting here and being able to make connections with what we have been seeing as the executing agency, what's happening in the global level. So some of the things that we do, it's implement activities that strengthen the network of indigenous peoples and local communities in the global level, and participation in this global forums where we have people speaking about climate and making decisions. And I think it's very interesting to sit here and see that we have 2 countries that had DGM. Indonesia closed a couple years back, and Brazil, it's closing now in November. And we have had a lot of activities in both countries. And I think what we want to say to the funds, it's especially about DGM, and this is a very strong mechanism that we see solid results happening on the ground. And we've had, if I'm not wrong, more than 900 sub-projects being not only led but implemented by indigenous peoples and local communities, and the synergy between funds and country, it's very important. And I think we need to strengthen this model. I think the DGM model has proven to be very successful. It's still ongoing. We currently have 3 active countries. Brazil, I think it's one of the countries that we always tell the story of Brazil, because Brazil has been the only country that has its second phase, and now they are closed in November, but they were able to use the same structure of a governance of DGM and have the national bank to help then and support. So basically, after November, they will still be active, working with the Quilombola communities and indigenous communities on the Cerrado of Brazil, using the same framework of DGM, having a national steering committee, making the decisions and implementing on the sub-projects. So I think the framework is there. What needs to be done is to strengthen the network. And I think right in the beginning, someone mentioned that it can take years, 3 to 5 years to get this whole structure in place, and it's a waste to not use it. And I think we really need to think about sustainability of models like this in the national level. And I think also one of the things that I heard from the panelists and also from Brazil, it's inclusion, that a system that promotes inclusive climate action. And I think this is very powerful when we think about that, and how models like DGM can challenge the norm of the structure. So just a comment, no questions, and thank you very much for sharing all this information and your thoughts.
Oh, thank you for sharing more about the DGM. That resonates with me personally because I led the evaluation of the forestry investment program, including the DGM. So not all things need to be scaled, but DGM should be. So thank you. Thank you for those points.
Thank you. Hi, I come from a foundation in Malaysia, and I'm just curious because I've been hearing that many of these funds go directly to ministries, right? Like ministries of environment. But I'm just curious whether there's a possibility of, like, having some funds or like a matching grant whereby probably like any of these fundings are matched with the amount that my foundation has to execute like projects on the ground, to give out grants. Because the foundation that we run in Malaysia, we are a grant giver, which is a foundation under the sovereign wealth of Malaysia. So we do receive money from the Ministry of Finance, but when it comes to environment projects, usually the amount allocated for environment projects, it's very sparse compared to community projects. So I'm just wondering if there's such possibility. I'm seeing the answer being DGM, but we'll let the panelists answer. I might take one more question if there is any before I hand it over to the panelists. You have a question or you want to answer? You want to? I'm just going to ask if there's any more questions in the audience. No? Okay, then I'm going to pass to Ben first. He was reaching out for the mic.
I am sorry. Yes, I was expecting to finish at 4:30, so I'm a bit over time. Yeah, but on this, I think this is a very important question. Thank you very much. I mean, we do have, I think, with most of the funds, and certainly with the GCF, we're accountable to the parties to the COP. So we have to work through our country focal points. That's the only way we can actually operate. So every investment has to have the support of our in GCF's case, our national designated authority, the national focal point for the GCF from the government side. That does not mean by any means that the funds from the GCF have to flow through government authorities directly, and that isn't the case. We have essentially we aim for a 50-50 split between private and public sector investments, which we generally maintain. We work in many cases through projects and programs where we partner directly with the kind of bodies that you're talking about. And we actually seek out those opportunities where possible, where we can actually use these in-country examples and experience as an entry point, so we can scale up your experience, but also leverage further financial opportunities through working closely with organizations like yours. So I think it's, yeah, this is all possible, and there are examples of these kind of approaches in all cases.
Go ahead. No, just rapidly saying that the Jeff model is the following. We do have what we call an operational focal point. It depends on the government. This person makes a decision, you know. But also we work with 18 implementing agencies. Those agencies are the agencies who really write the project with the government or with the stakeholders and submit the project to the Jeff, but they are overseeing the implementation of the project. They are not executing the project. And then those who execute could be anybody, but it could be an NGO. It could be very often it's because the government take a big part of it, the Ministry of Environment especially. But we have in many cases NGOs, private sector, or other stakeholders. It depends on the choice of the relevant stakeholders made by those who are writing the strategy of the project.
Yeah, and for the CIFs, I think it's similar. Let me just deal very briefly with 2 points here. One is, since you mentioned the focal points, and I mentioned this Rwanda example, going forward on these country platforms, one of the reasons it worked well in Rwanda, this is related, but I'll get to yours, is that the Rwanda Green Fund was kind of a neutral party that could bring together the 4 funds. In this case, it was basically CIF and GCF with a little bit of Jeff representation because there was already a project ongoing in the location for the project. I think planning ministries, part of the problem, part of the challenge, as Bunur mentioned, is, you know, you have focal point in environment ministry for one, and you have finance ministry for another, and at the country level, getting them together can be a challenge, and it's not really the fund's job to do that. You have to work with the governments. But I think a neutral third party, whether it's the planning ministry or like in Rwanda, the Green Fund, who served as the facilitator for that dialogue, can be very helpful. And they can bring in other partners like a foundation from the beginning. But more commonly, what you have is, the government encourages to look for other co-financing, particularly grant co-financing for projects. And that's where there's a long history of all of the, I don't know about the adaptation fund as much, but certainly for these 3 funds, there's always, they're delighted to get grant co-financing to pay for things that's more flexible and is able to come in and complement, especially if it's a loan funded project, then it makes it even more important to expand the grant portion of the project. So I think that there's an openness. It is difficult though to know where the opportunities lie. And hopefully as we go forward and we have more of these country platforms for coordination, then that will become an element.
Yeah, I don't have that much to add because this holds true mostly for the adaptation fund as well. I guess the only thing I'd like to add is that, and I think, again, this is true for at least some of the, I know it's true for the draft, but we work through implementing entities that are credited with the fund. And the implementing fund entities decide on execution arrangements, which often involves not just one, but several executing entities. And that is another way also to partake and contribute to the project. And also just to clarify, because I don't think I was clear earlier, we don't require co-financing, but of course, if co-financing is available, parallel financing, you know, it's certainly welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all the panelists and speakers and the participants here today. We are going to end right on time now, but we might just do a picture with everybody, including the speakers and whoever's here, and And then, but we'll just do a round of applause to all the panelists and speakers. Thank you so much for sparing your time to have this conversation today. Thank you very much. Maybe everybody at the front.